Hello and welcome everyone to the second of 3 Women in Translation readings as we celebrate Women in Translation Month together. I'm Annalise Finnegan, co-chair of the PEN Translation Committee, which advocates on behalf of literary translators working to forward a wider understanding of their art and to offer resources for those with an interest in international literature. Today's event is also being hosted by PEN America, and I am grateful to Aaliyah Gatto from PEN, who is managing the Zoom. PEN America's commitment to support women's voices in translation builds on the efforts by blogger Maytal Radzinski, whose mission is to raise awareness of translated literature by women, queer, and non-binary authors. For bringing together today's stellar assemblage of translators and authors, thanks go to the 3 co-organizers of this event series, Nancy Naomi Carlson, Jessie Lee Kercheval, and Catherine E. Young. We hope you'll register and join us for the final event in this series, which is scheduled for Thursday, August 30th at 1 p.m. EST, to hear a 3rd slate of author-translator pairs. I now have the pleasure of introducing the moderator of today's event, Jessie Lee Kercheval, who is a writer and translator specializing in Uruguayan poetry. She has been awarded a fellowship at the Banff Literary Translation Center and an NEA in translation. She is the Zona Gale Professor Emerita in poetry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you.
Thank you, Annalise, for that lovely introduction, and I echo all her thanks. I'm so happy to be moderating this exciting event representing 5 translators and their authors for real-time bilingual readings from around the globe. It's a great gift of Zoom. We have so many countries represented here and languages. The reading will be followed by a short Q&A session if time permits, so please submit your questions for any of the panelists in the comments section, and we'll ask them at the end. Keep going for as much time as we have. Our first pair of readers will be translator KB Thors and author Kristín Svava Tómasdóttir. All of the readings will be first the original language, the author, and then the translator. KB Thors is the author of Vulgar Mechanics, Coach House 2019, and Thors' translation of Tómasdóttir's Her Hero Stories is forthcoming from Deep Vellum in 2023. Kristín Svava Tómasdóttir is a poet and historian, and her 4th book, Hero Stories, 2020, won the Iceland's Women's Prize for Poetry. Welcome, KB and Kristín.
Hi, nice to see you all. Thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this. We will be reading from my book, Hetjusögur today, Hero Stories, which came out in Iceland in 2020 and will come out in the US either later this year or early next year. Just a quick comment on the book itself is composed of texts from another book, which is called Íslenskar ljósmæður or Icelandic Midwives, and is a book that contains historical narratives about midwives that were working in Iceland mostly in the late 19th and early 20th century. So this is kind of a rework of that historical material. And we will be reading a few poems from throughout the book. So kind of following the midwife on her journey. And yeah, I will begin. Fyrir barnaskap og forvitni og hégómaskap, hendingu eða tilviljun, hátíðlegt heit, minningu gamlan draum, dulin ögl, forlög, vísbendingu í draumi, loforð álfkonunnar, vitjanir látinna manna, dulda kennd, innri köllun, þrá af einhverri ómótstæðilegri þrá. Þrá til að læra, þrá til að menntast, þrá til að litast í heiminum, þrá til að kynnast einhverju öðru meiru, þrá til að verða. Stóð hugur hennar fremur til náms en búsýslu. Ef hún hefði verið fædd á þessari öld, hefði hún numið læknisfræði. Bara að ég hefði orðið drengur. Lærdómsbrölt, helber, hégómi, slíkt ódæði þótti þá að stúlkur lærðu að skrifa. Þú ert ekki orðin hreppstjóri ennþá. Allan vilja varð að bæla niður, allt varð að gerast í felum. Las allar bækur sem hún náði í, las allar bækur sem hún náði í, drakk í sig. Þá lýstu ekki rafmagnsljós úr gluggum, þá reyndi meira á líkamsþrek og þol, þá var margt öðruvísi en nú er. Nú þarf ekki annað en styðja á hnapp, þá er komið ljós í öllum áttum og sest að matborði í hlýrri stofu, ekið á bíla á sléttum vegum yfir brúaðar ár, landshorna í milli. Ungt fólk sem veltir sér í auraflóði nútímans mun naumast trúa því að þetta sé satt, erfiðið í ljósleysi aldanna. Byggðin að vísu fögur í sólskini og sumardýrð, fagur flóin sólin glitrar sund og eyjar og tignarleg traustu fjöllin standa þéttum fótum stormar æða. En allir vita að í mestu mandarópsbyljunum konum gjarnast að taka léttasóttina og helst að næturlagi. Og áin ekki umflúin eins og stórfljót, flóðmikil, straumþung, stórgrýtt og ströng, bólgin af frosti og kulda, flóði yfir alla bakka, foráttu vöxtur, vatnselgur, beljandi straumur, hvergi sá í eyri eða stein, drunur og skruðningar ruddist fram bólgin af frosti og flæddi yfir allt, bakka full af krapi og ís, rann ofan á ísnum, valt fram kolmórauð með jakaburði, beljaði fram hlaupin upp í frosti og bil, hlaupin upp í frostinu, stórir jakar slitu af sér klakaböndin, fossandi, beljandi vatnsflaumur rann ofan á ísnum, ísin að bresta, hestarnir að sökkva til botns, ísin að bresta, áin að brjóta stöpulinn undan brúarendanum, byltist fram kolmórauð og straumhærð, illfær, ófær, ógnandi, skaðræðis vatnsfall, versta vatn í allri sýslunni. Hesturinn trylltur, hesturinn í ánni, hesturinn í óferðinni, hesturinn í pyttinum, hesturinn í mógröfinni, hesturinn í sandkvikunni, hesturinn í sandbleitunni, hesturinn á kafi í ánni, hesturinn á kafi í ánni, flugstraumurinn veltandi hestinum í ánni, jakarnir riðandi undir fótum hennar, lesandi faðirvorið í huganum, vildi ekki deyja svona ung. Aldrei var skammdegismyrkrið svo svart, frostið svo biturt, ófærðin svo mikil, hríðarkófið svo þykkt að hún léti bilbuga á sér finna að leggja út í óveðri. Aldrei urðu vötnin henni farartálmi, aldrei brast hana kjark, aldrei dró hún úr því að lagt væri á tæpasta vaðið.
Okay. Out of childishness and curiosity, curiosity and vanity, coincidence or chance, a solemn vow, a memory of an old dream, mysterious forces, fate, fate, directions in a dream, an elf woman's promise, visits from dead folk, secret sense, inner calling, yearning, through some irresistible yearning. Yearning to learn, yearning to be educated, yearning to look around the world, yearning to get to know something else, something more, yearning to become. Her mind was on study rather than housework. If she had been born in this century, she would have studied medicine. If only I had been a boy. Learning nonsense, sheer vanity, such outrageous thoughts back then, girls learning to write. You're not sheriff yet. All will had to be suppressed. Everything had to happen in hiding. Read all the books she could find. Read all the books she could find. Absorbed. Then there was no electric light from the windows. Then strength and stamina mattered more. Then much was different than it now is. Now all you have to do is press a button, then light comes in all directions. Sitting down at the dinner table in a warm living room, driving a car on smooth roads over bridged rivers from one corner of the country to the other, young people swimming in pools of modern coin will hardly believe this to be true. The difficulty, the darkness of centuries. The homestead certainly beautiful in sunshine and summer glory. Beautiful the bay as the sun glitters on streams and islands, and majestic solid mountains stand firm-footed as storms rage. But everyone knows women like to go into labor during the deadliest blizzards, and usually at night. And the river cannot be avoided. Like a major river, great flood, heavy currents, big boulders, and the severe swell of frost and cold flooding all over the bank, high water levels, roaring torrent, sandbar or stone nowhere to be seen, thunder and shearing ice rushing forward, the swell of frost and flood over everything, the bank full of slush and ice sliding over the ice, tumbling dirt red with ice chunks, roaring forth, the rush up in the frost and snowstorm, the rush into the frost, big ice flows tearing free from ice bands, gushing, roaring, torrential water streaming over the ice cracking, the horses sinking to the bottom, the ice cracking, the river breaking, the pillar under the end of the bridge, tossing dirt red in rapids, bad going, ungoable, terrifying, wicked river water. Worst water in the whole county. The horse wild with fear, the horse in the river, the horse in the impassable, the horse in the pit, the horse in the peat bog, the horse in quicksand, the horse in wet sand, the horse submerged in the river, the horse submerged in the river, the fleet current rolling the horse in the river, the ice flow swaying under her feet. Reciting the Lord's Prayer in her mind, did not want to die so young. Never was the short day dark so black, the cold so bitter, the going so heavy, the whiteout so thick, that she hesitated to set out in unthinkable weather. Never would the water bar her way, never broke her spirit, never shied away from the riskiest ford. Thank you. Just want to thank Penn for having us. This is a really great series.
Thank you, KB and Kristín. That was just wonderful. Our next pair of readers will be translator Grace Mahoney and author Iryna Starovoyt. Grace Mahoney is an emerging translator and editor of the Lost Horse Press Contemporary Ukrainian Poetry Series, and she lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Iryna Starovoyt is a poet and professor of cultural studies at the Ukrainian Catholic University. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for welcoming us. I'm speaking from Lviv in Ukraine. My country is half a year into the big war, but my hope is that many fellow citizens will survive this war. This is tragic and transformative time for us. With the help of its many allies, Ukraine won the Battle of Kyiv and effectively holds a front line of more than 2,000 kilometers. And I just want to say with these poems that I see a new generation of Ukrainians coming of age in the eye of the historical tornado, generation which is both resilient and robust, and which will neither fall a victim of a bad neighborhood, nor will be trapped grieving our monuments to poets, eco-activists, reformers, and anti-corruptionists who died in this war. New generation's freedom is coupled with its prowess. These young, smart, and capable people will continue the work of reviving our country and making it an ever better and welcoming place. The cherry orchard has been the epitome of Ukrainian environmental thinking since the Baroque time, tender and stoic. One must cultivate one's own orchard by love and duty. I will read from this book, which has been published by Thors Press almost 5 years ago. Сестри більше не плакатимуть, не будуть кусати пошерхлі губи, не помильно цілитися горловим співом тобі у серце під спідницею, коли ти ще носила спідницю. Не будуть матюкати тебе по рації, а потім ставити вподобайки в ФБ. Не будуть стирати вологими серветками триденної немитості під пахвами, стелити фіранки в окопи для затишку, і щоб не болотити спини, напинати м'язи на шиї, здригатися в напівсні, втримуючи на автоприцілі снайпера з того боку. Щомісячні кровотечі призвичаїли вас до запаху і процесу. Хай тече, як у всіх савців, пульсує у скронях і на зап'ястку, тисне зсередини, пускається носом. Хай вчить любити живих, накладати джгути, обмивати померлих. Розпука розпукнеться з тебе, як зі стручка. Викотяться дні не чорні, ночі не білі. Не ти, а твоя рука, не та з рукава. Тут могло бути інше закінчення, але не буде.
Your sisters will no longer weep. They will not bite chapped lips or aim a throaty song at you, sent to the heart under your dress, when you were still wearing dresses. They will curse at you over walkie-talkies and then like your posts on FB. They won't clean their armpits with damp washcloth for 3 days. They won't lay curtains in the trenches for comfort, to keep clean from the mud. They'll strain their necks and shudder with exhaustion, watching the other side of the line through a sniper scope. They've grown accustomed to your monthly bleeding, to the smell and the process. Let it flow like in all mammals, pulsing in the temples and on the wrist. It presses from the inside, starting with the nose. Let's learn to love the living, to apply a tourniquet, to wash the dead. As if from a split pod, misfortune spills from you. Days roll out, not black, nights, not white. Not you, your hand, not that one, the other. Here there could be a different ending, but there won't be.
І вони прийдуть мити хату після мене, як після покійника. Спочатку похукають і попротирають дзеркала, далі чистюлею повідрають мої відбитки з мушлі і з унітазу, познімають магнітики з холодильника, зрада чи перемога, витрусять листи і блокноти зі скромних шухляд, запалять, стоячи на балконі, зроблять інспекцію на предмет осиних гнізд чи раптом мурашників, спалять мої фотографії і документи, застукають на гарячому мої любовні зв'язки зі старими меблями, з кріслом рипучим та вірним, з шафою, яка знала мій запах, з терпеливим кухонно-письмовим столом, який досі мене не забув. Нові жильці сядуть на моєму дивані, обіймуться. Вона красива, вагітна. Вип'ють чаю з моїх горнят, запалять мої свічки. Тільки велика ведмедиця перепитає, хто тут на чиєму лежав? І що тут погано лежало? І що тут погано?
They will come to clean the house after me, as after the deceased. First, they fog up and wipe the mirrors. Then they scrub fingerprints from the sink and the toilet. take the souvenir magnets from the fridge. Is it #betrayal or #victory? From my modest drawers, they shake out papers and notebooks. They smoke on the balcony while investigating the issue of wasps' nests and ants. They burn my photos and documents. They catch me red-handed in my love affair with old furniture, the armchair, creaky but faithful, a closet that knew my smell, a patient kitchen, and a writing desk, who have not yet forgotten me. New tenants will come and sit on my couch, cuddle each other. The woman is beautiful, pregnant. They will drink tea from my cups, will light my candles. Only Ursa Major, that great mama bear, asks, "Who's been sleeping in my bed? Something's not right. What's gone wrong here?"
And the last one. А потім вони виростають, діти з очима дорослих. Зайд пізнають по вимові, як зілля за пахом, вистригають наголо чуби свої дикорослі, заокруглюють голови, ловлять родимки страху. Наука кохання й смерти не йде до лісу, черпають натхнення з подвійного дна надії, приводять на світ дітей, одного тісного замісу, котрим до колиски співається «Що з вами в дію?». Кожен наступний рік додає їм по сантиметру. Звільнена кров у жилах вурдиться і скипає. Спочатку житимуть вічно, тоді поховають мертвих, змучаться бути дітьми і дійсно повиростають.
And then they grow up, children with the eyes of adults, recognizing newcomers by their accents, like herbs by scent, shaving forelocks from untamed hair, rounding their heads bare and snagging the moles of fear. The faculties of love and death don't run for the hills. They draw inspiration from the hidden drawer of hope. They bring children to a world, a tight piece of dough, and sing to the cradle, "What shall I do with you?" Every year adds a centimeter. The blood freed in their veins bubbles and boils. At first, they will live eternally, then bury their dead, and tired of childhood, indeed grow up. Thank you, Iryna, and thank you to Penn and everyone here.
Thank you, Grace and Iryna. That was very moving. And I want to thank you, Iryna, especially because to read to us via Zoom from a war, I can't thank you enough. Our next pair of readers will be translator D.P. Snyder and author Mónica Crespo. D.P. Snyder is a bilingual writer, translator, critic, and contributor to Reading and Translation. Her first book-length translation is Meaty Pleasures, Katakana Editores, 2021, selected stories by the Mexican author Mónica Lavin. Mónica Crespo is a Basque writer, lecturer, and professor of creative writing. The Secret Mothers was a finalist in 2018 for the Spanish prizes Setenil and Tigre Juan. Welcome, DP and Mónica.
Hello, and thank you very much for this invitation. It's a big pleasure, and I am very glad to present this book, Las Madres Secretas, that is composed by 15 short stories, and I am going to read one of those. Gemelos. Cuando se ahogó, todo quedó en silencio. Estaba en el agua tibia. Me acerqué y no pude hacer más que tomar su cuerpo de rana muerta. Lo envolví en una toalla blanca. Me senté con él en mi regazo. Su cuerpo desmadejado estaba caliente y suave, como siempre. Me acuné a mí misma con él. No pude llorar. Así que lo abandoné en el suelo, envuelto como una crisálida, y tomé a mi ahora único hijo, sacándolo del agua de la bañera. El sonido del gotear de su cuerpo me hizo reaccionar y ocuparme de él. El cordón que solía ponerles en las muñecas se había desprendido. Eran tan idénticos que ni yo misma los distinguía. Ahora no sabía cuál de mis dos hijos seguía vivo. Decidí que los dos. John sería Eric y Eric sería John. Nadie lo notaría, no permitiría que me juzgaran. Vestí a mi hijo vivo, cuya identidad se había duplicado, y vestí a mi hijo muerto, que se había desvanecido. Ya nada sería lo mismo, pero debería serlo. Cuando nacieron John y Eric, mi alegría fue inmensa y por supuesto doble. Desde entonces siempre había sido todo doble. Las noches en vela, el cambio de pañales, los llantos y los pucheros. Y también los gorgoritos y las miradas tiernas y plácidas y un olor denso a bebé inundándolo todo doblemente. ¿Cómo había podido ocurrir siquiera? ¿En qué momento mi mano dejó de sostener y empujó con rabia hacia abajo? John bajaba por la escalera de madera. Cada mañana zapateaba los escalones que resonaban bajo sus pies, de la misma manera cada mañana. Sorbía la leche en cucharadas pausadas y largas, y yo deseaba que acabara, que terminara el desayuno de sopas de pan y leche tibia azucarada. Y él cada mañana lo terminaba. Yo me retorcía las manos en el delantal blanco, mirándolo desde la puerta de la salita que comunicaba con la cocina. Él de espaldas, desayunando. Hubiera sido tan fácil. No lo podía soportar y comenzaba a carraspear nerviosa y le llamaba constantemente. John, date prisa, vas a llegar tarde al colegio, termina el desayuno, haz el favor. Y él lo hacía. Cada mañana lo terminaba. Yo lo veía alejarse desde la ventana y rezaba para que el día fuera largo y porque ya había pasado otra mañana más. A veces fantaseaba con envenenar la leche, con ser libre, con poder olvidar el cuerpecillo de ranita muerta y los ojos de rana viva, y no sentir ese peso, esa losa inmensa aplastándome mientras lo veía de espaldas, sentado a la mesa, confiando, con la leche tibia y estúpida en su garganta, aún pura a pesar de todo. A pesar de que solo queda uno. A pesar de saber y no querer saber y vivir así, confiando en quien más le quiere nunca le hará daño. ¿Y quién lo asegura? Le digo adiós con la mano en el mismo preciso e invariable momento en el que él gira la cabeza y mira hacia la ventana, como cada mañana. Me apresuro, me pongo las medias. Hoy se me enredan en el tobillo y no consigo subirlas. Exasperada pego un tirón. Las desgarro y tiro con fuerza para zafarme de ellas definitivamente. No consigo serenarme. Hoy hace exactamente 7 años y he de salir hacia el hospital. Me siento sobre la cama y miro las agujas del reloj. El minutero recorre la esfera amarilla y la banda color verde del centro dibuja un ecuador imaginario tras el cual habré de ponerme en marcha sin dilación. Cuando la aguja del minutero atraviese el ecuador de la esfera amarilla, ya no habrá tiempo. Mientras me detengo mirando la esfera, 7 segundos perdida en la nada, detenida en una franja verde que no es nada. Como yo, un ecuador vacío, tan solo un lugar para ser atravesado. El ecuador es atravesado por la aguja del reloj amarillo. Me pongo los zapatos sin medias y salgo golpeando la puerta tras de mí. En el portal, la vecina de todos los días. La detesto. Saludo cordial, con una sonrisa de par en par. Es la de todas las mañanas, sale sin ensayar. Pobre vieja, ella ni siquiera tendrá un ecuador verde para detener el tiempo. No tiene hijos ni familiares. Cuando sea más vieja, morirá sola y el olor de su cuerpo nos alertará a todos los vecinos. Hasta entonces la saludo cada mañana. Ella siempre me pregunta por mis hijos. No quiero, pero contesto. En el colegio Aurora, como cada mañana. Y recuerdo el cuerpo blando y cálido entre mis manos. Y supongo que su cuerpo también será blando y cálido, sumergido en el agua caliente. Los viejos y los niños no son tan diferentes. La sumerjo mentalmente. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pen, for inviting Mónica and I to read. In 2018, Mónica's book, Las Madres Secretas, was a finalist for the Spanish Literary Prizes Premio Setenil and Premio Tigre I. She opens a window into the dark thoughts of women with tales that are both realistic and fantastic. And she shows how motherhood is instinctual, but also perverse. Twins. When he drowned, everything went quiet. It seems my connection was unstable. I will try again.
Yes, start again, please. Thanks, Dory.
When he drowned, everything went quiet. He was in the warm water and I came, yes. Okay. Twins. When he drowned, everything went quiet. He was in the warm water and I came over and there was nothing to do but to pick up his dead frog body, wrap it in a white towel and sit down with him on my lap. His fragile form was just as warm and soft as always. I I'm in a hotel.
We're having some trouble. Do you think you're going to be able to continue, or is it
I'm
really...
so I'll try one more time. I can't help it. I'm in a hotel.
No, really technical things are never the fault of the person who's
I'm going to
doing
try
it.
again.
And we got to hear the lovely version in Spanish, so but you can try again.
Okay. When he drowned, everything went quiet. He was in the warm water and I came over and there was nothing to do but to pick up his dead frog body and wrap it in a white towel and sit down with him on my lap. His fragile form was just as warm and soft as always. I cradled both myself and him. I could not cry, so I left him on the floor, wrapped up like a chrysalis, and took hold of my now only child and removed him from the bathwater. The sound of
I think, Dorothy, we're going to have to leave it with the lovely Spanish version.
I'm so sorry.
No. It is the will of the Zoom gods. But I think many of our audience could probably understand Monica's version in Spanish. So, but thank you very, very much, DP and Monica. And our next pair of readers will be the translator Kristina Vega-Westhoff and author Melanie Taylor Herrera. Kristina Vega-Westhoff is a poet, translator, aerialist, and teaching artist. Her book, Suelo, Tide Cement, won the Knight Book Prize for Poetry, and her translations have appeared in numerous literary journals. And Melanie Taylor Herrera is a Panamanian psychologist, violinist, and author of poetry and prose. Her works include Tiempos Acuáticos, Amables Predicciones, y Microcosmos. Welcome, Kristina and Melanie.
Hi, thanks for the invitation. My name is Melanie Taylor. I'm Panamanian. I live in Panama, that is between Costa Rica and Colombia. And the short story I'm about to read was originally published in this book, Camino Amariato, which won an award by Women Writer Association from Nicaragua. I don't think they exist anymore, at least actively, because of the political situation in Nicaragua, but it was an opportunity to be read around the region. And Christina did a beautiful translation job of this, I believe so. I had a question for Mrs. Crespo, but because I don't know if that goes with the dynamic of this meeting, I will write it down for her to answer to me later. Yeah, so I start reading. The name of the title of the short story is El Viaje. La voz se corrió rápidamente y las monjas ya no disimularon sus preparativos. Algunas de las niñas que vivían con las monjas fueron enviadas de regreso a sus familias. La primera criada en ser trasladada fue María la Gorda, quien fue enviada a trabajar al Hospital San Juan de Dios. Partió casi de madrugada. Solo tuvieron tiempo de darle un abrazo y verla desaparecer por la puerta antes de que una de las monjas, con voz cortante, las dispersara. Al marcharse la Gorda, la servidumbre se sumió en una melancolía colectiva. Las tareas se hacían con desgano y lentitud, pero los días pasaban veloces. A algunos les dio por recordar cómo llegaron a Panamá. Otros, los esclavos más viejos, rememoraron el terremoto de 40 años atrás. Si habían sobrevivido a eso, también sobrevivirían a los ingleses. Mercedes los escuchaba a la hora del almuerzo sin decir palabra. No deseaba ir a ningún lado. No deseaba fugarse, ni hallar a los cimarrones, ni internarse en Malambo con alguno de los boteros o aguateros. Tampoco deseaba servir en algún otro lugar. Quizás podría de alguna manera esconderse en el convento y los ingleses no la encontrarían. Las monjas se molestaron terriblemente cuando la Caimana y María Piedad desaparecieron el mismo día, 2 días después de la partida de María la Gorda. Esto puso en aprietos al resto, pues fueron interrogadas hasta el hartazgo por las monjas. Ninguna pudo dar mayores explicaciones del paradero de las fugadas. La Caimana era una mujer fuerte y se sentía capaz de llegar al Palenque. En compañía de 2 hombres, Matías y José, se habían internado en Pierdevidas durante el día y a medianoche partieron hacia el Atlántico. Ella sí recordaba el viaje de llegada a estas tierras. Había sido separada de sus hijos y de su hombre, encadenada por los portugueses, vejada y torturada, vendida en la feria de Portobelo, traída hasta la casa de los genoveses, vendida nuevamente por su dueño a las monjas luego del terremoto de 1621. No le temía a la jungla, la había caminado desde Portobelo hasta Panamá. No temía a los caimanes, los había agarrado con sus propias manos en la playa cerca del matadero, de ahí su nombre, y de eso eran testigos varios niños y a un soldado. No le temía a los españoles, veía cierta justicia en el hecho de que ahora vivieran en carne propia lo que ella había vivido, que otros llegaran y se llevaran tu casa, tu familia, tu dignidad, hasta convertirte en una sombra de lo que habías sido. No le temía a ninguna deidad, ni a ninguna deidad culpaba o endilgaba sus actos, pues en su mente no existían, solo existía el sol, la luna, la selva y la fuerza de sus brazos para sobrevivir. Debían ser cuidadosos al internarse en la selva, pues ahora con los ingleses en camino, los españoles enviaban patrullas para vigilar los movimientos de los mismos. No sería conveniente toparse con un grupo de soldados. Matías y José le contaban de la vida en el Palenque. Los africanos eran sus propios amos y señores. Debían acatar ciertas reglas para vivir en paz, pero en general la vida era pacífica. Podría construir su propia choza y cultivar la tierra. El sonido del mar se oía en el pueblo noche y día. Se tocaba tambor y se bailaba sin prohibiciones ni líos. Se pescaba en grandes cantidades. Esa vida idílica, pintada por Matías y José, le daba sustento a su espíritu sediento de justicia. Le hacía olvidar las molestias del camino, la falta de alimentos que le obligaba a cazar lo que podían y comer de los frutos que encontraban, el calor sofocante y la incertidumbre.
I'll just preface really briefly that this is a story, and I feel like you probably heard it in the Spanish, of layers of conquest and layers of liberation taking place in Panama on the Pacific coast. And the first European capital city, of conquest, founded in 1519. And this is happening the story takes place just before the 1617 arrival of Morgan. So layers of European colonization told through really like almost a chorus, but focusing on 3 central characters who were enslaved inside the convent.
And so then I'll just start. It's in the middle of the story. Word spread quickly, and the nuns no longer disguised their preparations. Some of the girls who lived with the nuns were sent back to their families. The first of the servants to be transferred was Fat Maria, who was sent to work at the hospital San Juan de Dios. She left just before dawn. They only had time to hug her and watch her disappear out the door before a nun's sharp voice dispersed them. With Fat Maria's departure, the servants sunk into a collective melancholy. They did their work slowly and indifferently, but the days flew by. Some remembered how they arrived in Panama. Others, the oldest slaves, recalled the earthquake of 40 years back. If they had survived the earthquake, they could survive the English. Mercedes listened to them through lunch, saying nothing. She didn't want to go anywhere. She didn't want to escape or find the runaways or cross through to Malambo with a few of the boatmen or water carriers. She didn't want to be made to serve elsewhere either. Perhaps she could somehow hide in the convent and the English wouldn't find her. The nuns were terribly upset when Caimana and Maria Pieta disappeared on the same day, 2 days after the departure of Fat Maria. This put the rest of them in a predicament. The nuns interrogated them to exhaustion. None of the maids could offer information about the fugitives' whereabouts. Caimana was a strong woman, and she felt capable of arriving at the Cimarron settlement, the Palenque. In the company of 2 men, Matthias and Jose, she had penetrated into Piedras by day, and at midnight had left for the Atlantic. She remembered the voyage, her arrival to these lands. She'd been separated from her children and her beloved, chained by the Portuguese, humiliated and tortured, sold in the Portobello fair, brought to the house of the Genoese, and after the earthquake of 1621, sold again by her owner to the nuns. She wasn't afraid of the jungle. She had walked through it from Portobello to Panama. She wasn't afraid of the caimans. She had grabbed them with her own hands at the beach near Matadero, hence her name. Various children and a soldier had witnessed it. She wasn't afraid of the Spanish. She saw a certain justice that they would now suffer in their own flesh what she had lived, that others would arrive and take your house, your family, your dignity, until they had turned you into a shadow of what you had been. She wasn't afraid of any deity, nor did she blame any deity, as in her mind they didn't exist. Only the sun, moon, jungle, and the strength of her arms, which she used to survive, existed. They had to be careful about going into the jungle now. Now that the English were en route, the Spanish sent patrols to observe their movements. It'd be inopportune to stumble upon a group of soldiers. Matthias and Jose told her about life in the Palenque. The Africans were their own masters and lords. They had to respect certain rules to live in peace, but in general, life was tranquil. They could build their own homes and farm the land. You could hear the sound of the ocean in the village day and night. They played the drums, danced without limitations or fuss, and they caught great quantities of fish. This idyllic life Matthias and Jose depicted gave sustenance to her spirit, which thirsted for justice, and helped her to forget the difficulties of the road. The lack of food, which forced them to hunt what they could and to eat the fruits they found, the suffocating heat, and the uncertainty of it all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was really, really, really lovely. The next readers, our last readers, will actually, I should pause for a second here and say I now have the print version. I've got an emailed DP's translation. So at the very end, I'm going to read it cold in English so everyone can share it. We've got a number of responses from the audience and they'd really like to hear it. But first, we have our last pair of readers and translators. We have Deanna Cachoian-Schanz and Shushan Avagyan. Deanna is a translator working in the geographies of Armenia, Turkey, and their diasporas at the intersection of critical feminist and queer theory, archive, and critical race studies. And Shushan is a translator and author of 2 experimental novels in Armenian and is the co-founder of the Queer Femme Queering Yerevan collective in Armenia's capital. Welcome, Deanna and Shushan.
Thank you so very much for having us. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book before Shushan starts this off. Girka Lerna Gir, or a book untitled, is an experimental novel published as Samizdat in Yerevan in 2006, and we're happy to say that it's forthcoming with House Press in the spring of 2023. It is the first of Avagyan's 2 novels. The novel's plot pivots around an imagined encounter in 1926 between 2 feminist Armenian writers, Shushan and Zabel Yeseyan, whose legacies had been obscured and forgotten due to nationalist tendencies and patriarchal gatekeeping in the Armenian literary and historical canons at the time. Kurpinyan, who moved to Rostov-on-Don to escape the threat of imprisonment by the Tsar's authorities, refused to succumb to nationalist literary opportunism, and as such, her legacy was destroyed by literary critics, who derided her poetry as lacking artistry. Yeseyan, after having escaped persecution in Ottoman Turkey at the onset of the Armenian genocide, was later imprisoned by Stalin's regime and disposed of, the conditions of her disappearance and death still unknown today. In chapter 15, To the Square, the section we'll read from today, the narrator fills in what has been erased from the archive, taking the reader into a fictional conversation, which she imagines might have taken place in the prison where Yeseyan was being interrogated by Soviet authorities, and when her children, Sophie and Hrant, would come to visit her. And these authorities are called the interrogators in this passage. The square here refers to freedom squares typical of post-Soviet cities after the fall of the USSR. Shushan.
Գլուխ 15 դեպի հրապարակ Եթե սա լիներ գրքի առաջաբանը, ապա այլ կերպ կշարադրեի բացման առաջին տողերը երևի թե այսպես Սիրելի ընթերցող նախքան շարունակելը զգուշացնում եմ որ շատերն անդարձ կորան այս փոքրիկ թունավոր գրքի էջերում Կամ էլ այսպես ընկեր ձեռքդ տուր քեզ հետ ալեծուփ ծովն է ինձ անծուփ քեզ համար ինձ հետ չկա արահետ
Chapter 15 To the Square. If this were the book's preface, I'd render the opening lines different. Perhaps like this. Dear reader, before continuing, I warn you that you may have irretrievably lost themselves among the pages of this small, poisonous book. Or this way. Friend, give me your hand. With you, the turbulent sea is calm. For you, there is no path with me.
Երկրորդ քնիր, ստորագրեք այստեղ, Հրանտ Տիգրանի Եսայան, ունեք ընդամենը կես ժամ, ժառանգական իրավունքի վկայական, 1937 թվականից ի վեր գրում է Սոֆին Տրոցկիստ էր դարձել, կենթանի խեղկատակություն սովետական կյանքից, ստորագրված 14 ապրիլի 1940 թվական, դա եղբորս վերջին տեսակցությունն էր, երկրորդ քնիչ, ձեր բնակարանում գտանք մի նկար, դուք Թոթովենցի հետ միասին, այն արված արտասահմանում, Երկրորդ քնիչ չեք հերքում, երկրորդ քնիչ որտեղ է արված նկարը
Second interrogator. Sign right here. Hrant Tigran Yeseyan. You only have half an hour. A certificate of hereditary rights. From 1937 on, Sophie writes that she'd become a Trotskyite, a veritable buffoonery of Soviet life. Signed, April 14th, 1940. That was my brother's last visit. Second interrogator. We found a photograph in your apartment, you, together with Totovens. It was taken abroad. Second interrogator. You don't deny it? Second interrogator. Where was the picture taken?
Առաջին քնիչ, այս գիշեր տեսա մի երազ, թույլ տվեք պատմել ձեզ։ Առավոտյան վեր կացա ու զգույշ, որ կնոջս չարթացնեմ, գնացի ցնցուղարան։ Բացեցի սառը ջուրն ու կանգնեցի թարմացնող հոսանքի տակ, այդպես մի քանի վայրկյան, շատ հաճելի էր։ Մտքովս անցան մի քանի անկապ բաներ երեկվա իրադարձություններից, հետո բարձրաձայն ինքս ինձ ասացի, որ չմոռանամ կրպակից թերթ վերցնել։ Այդ պահին հանկարծ լսեցի ինչ-որ տարօրինակ ձայն, թևերի թափահարման պես մի բան։ Նայեցի վեր եւ իրոք ցնցուղի ձողի նստած էր մի սև թռչուն, չի կարող պատահել ինքս ինձ ասացի ու շարունակեցի նորմալ ձևով։ Ագրավ թռչունը օդ բարձրացավ ու սկսեց գլխիս վրա պտույտներ գործել։ Շտապ անջատեցի ջուրն ու ծածկվեցի սրբիչով։ Ժամանակը եկել է լսեցի վերևից։ Եվ գիտեք, ինչպես երբեմն տեսնում ես ինքդ քեզ կողքից, ասես ռեժիսոր, որ ղեկավարում է նկարահանման ու դերասանների բոլոր գործողությունները, այդպես ահա տեսա ինքս ինձ ծնկի եկած ցնցուղարանում մերկ։ Տեսա ինքս ինձ անօգնական, վախեցած ու չկարողացա միջամտել, ինչպես կմիջամտեր ռեժիսորը, երբ ինչ-որ բան սխալ է ընթանում։
First interrogator. Last night I had a dream. Let me tell you about it. I woke up in the morning and I went to the shower, carefully so I wouldn't wake up my wife. I turned on the cold water and stood under the refreshing stream. I stood like that for a few seconds. It was so pleasant. A few random thoughts passed my mind from yesterday's events, and then I reminded myself out loud not to forget to take paper from the newsstand. And then suddenly I heard a strange sound, something like wings beating. I looked up, and there perched on the shower rod was a blackbird. It can't be, I said to myself, and carried on as usual. The raven bird flew up into the air and began circling over my head. I turned off the water in a hurry and wrapped myself in a towel. The time has come, I heard from above. And you know how sometimes you see yourself from the side, like a director who controls all the actions and actors in a shoot? I saw myself just like that, on my knees, in the shower, naked. I saw myself helpless and frightened, and I couldn't intervene like directors do when something goes wrong.
Երկրորդ քնիչ, ձեր որդին շատ երիտասարդ է թուլական։ Երկրորդ քնիչ, երդվում էր, որ մայրն ազգի դավաճան չէ։ Երկրորդ քնիչ, ընդհակառակը պնդում էր, որ դուք հերոս եք։ Առաջին քնիչ, սակայն ում է հավակնում Վիրջինիա Վուլֆը։ Ինչն է նրա համար կարևոր, ինչն է ամենաթանկը։ Նա նստած իր սենյակում պատուհանից դուրս է նայում։ Ոչ մեկին չի հուզում ու ես նրանց չեմ մեղադրում վեպի ապագան, բանաստեղծության վախճանը կամ էլ առնվազն միջակ կնոջ նոր արձակ ոճի փորձարկումը, որը բնորոշ է միայն իրեն այդ միջահասակ կնոջը։ Եթե այս հարցերի շուրջ գոյություն ունենար մի որևէ կարծիք, ասում են նա, ու այդ կարծիքը կավիճով մեծատառերով գրված լիներ մայթի վրա, ոչ մեկն էլ կանգ չէր առնի, գոնե հայացք ձգելու դրա վրա։ Մի կես ժամից հետո ավելացնում է Վուլֆը, ամփույթ ու անտարբեր ոտքերը կսրբեին այդ հարցերը ու նրա հետքն էլ չէր մնա։
Second interrogator. Your son is very young. He's weak. Second interrogator. He was swearing that his mother was not a traitor of the nation. Second interrogator. On the contrary, he was insisting that you were a hero. First interrogator. But who does Virginia Woolf claim to be? What's important for her? What's most valuable? Sitting in her room, she looks out the window. Nobody cared a straw, and I do not blame them for the future of fiction, the death of poetry, or the development by the average woman of prose style completely expressive of her mind. If opinions upon any of these matters had been chalked on the pavement, nobody would have stooped to read them, she says. In half an hour, Woolf adds, the nonchalance of the hurrying feet would have rubbed them out.
Սակայն շատերին է հուզում ազգային հարցը, ոմանք այնքան են տարվում ազգային հարցով, որ իրենց տան պատերին սկսում են քանդակել խաչքարեր ու մեսրոպյան տառերը։ Վուլֆի համար թանկ են տարվում ոչ թե շենքերի պատերը զարդարելու համար, այլ բարձրաձայն արտասանելու ու արտասանության կամ արտահայտման ընթացքում նոր իմաստներ գտնելու համար։ Զգալ լեզվի ներկայությունը, բացահայտնաբերել, սովորական դարձած բառակապակցություններն ու ուսումնասիրել նրանց արմատները, որտեղից են սերվում եւ ինչու են փոխել իրենց սկզբնական իմաստավորումները։ Այս տառերը, որ անգիր ենք սովորում, անգիր, իշխողությամբ, կրկնությամբ, Երևանի փողոցներով քայլում էին գունազարդ մարդիկ, բոլորը դեպի հրապարակ։ Քաղաքը ծանոթ էր, բայց անծանոթ էին մարդիկ։ Բարձրախոսով հնչում էր քաղաքական գործիչներից մեկի առույգ ձայնը, բոլորը դեպի հրապարակ։ Շքերթում խոսակցությամբ տարված երկու կին միասին քայլում էին, դեպի ազատության հրապարակ։
But the national question matters to many. Some people get so carried away with it that they begin to carve Mahoney's letters and crossstones on the walls of their houses. Letters are valuable for Woolf, not for decorating the walls of buildings, but to recite out loud, and through their recitation or expression, find new meanings. To feel the presence of language, to uncover phrases that have become commonplace and examine their roots. From whence have they come and why have they changed from their original meanings? These letters, which we learn by heart, through memory, and repetition. Colorful people were walking along the streets of Yerevan, all of them to the square. The city was familiar, but the people were unfamiliar. One of the political activists was chanting energetically into the bullhorn. Everyone to the square. Two women lost in conversation were walking together in the parade towards Freedom Square. Thank you so much, Shushan, and thank you all for having us here.
Thank you so much, Deanna and Shushan. That was just wonderful, really moving. I love the translation of the words at the end. I now have Dorothy VP Snyder is able to email me the text she couldn't read. I'm going to read some of it, and I think that will still give us a good half an hour for questions. So remember, in the audience, you can drop questions for the readers. And right now I'm going to read Twins by Mónica Crespo, translated by DB Snyder. When he drowned, everything went quiet. He was in the warm water, and I came over, and there was nothing to do but pick up his dead frog body, wrap it in a white towel, and sit down with him on my lap. His fragile form was just as soft and warm as always. I cradled both myself and him. I could not cry. So I left him on the floor, wrapped up like a chrysalis, and took hold of my now only child and removed him from the bathwater. The sound of his dripping body snapped me out of it and made me tend to him. The lanyard I'd put on their wrist had slipped off. The two of them were so identical that even I couldn't tell them apart. Now I had no idea which one of my sons was still alive. I decided they both were. John would be Eric, and Eric would be John. No one would know the difference. I would not let them judge me. I dressed my living child, whose identity had doubled, and dressed my dead child, who had slipped away. Now nothing would ever be the same again, and yet it had to be. When John and Eric were born, my joy was boundless, and of course double. Since then, everything had been double. The sleepless nights, the diaper changes, the crying and the pouting, and the cooing and the tender, soft gazes too, and that strong baby smell permeating everything 2 times over. How could it even have happened? At what moment did my hand stop supporting him and start to push down furiously? John walked down the wooden staircase. Every morning he stomped on the risers that rang beneath his feet, the exact same way every morning. He slurped his milk with long, slow spoonfuls, and I wanted him to be done, for him to finish his breakfast of bread dunked in warm, sugary milk. And every morning he finished. And I would wring my hands in my white apron, watching him from the door of the little room off the kitchen, he with his back toward me, having his breakfast. It wouldn't have been so easy. I couldn't stand it, and I began to clear my throat nervously and call out to him again, over and over again. John, hurry up, you're going to be late for school. Kindly finish your breakfast. And he would do it. Every morning he finished it. I would watch him walk away from the window and pray for the day would be long because another morning was over. Sometimes I fantasized about poisoning the milk, about being free, being able to forget the little dead frog body in the eyes of the living frog and stop feeling that weight, that giant slab crushing me while I watched him from behind as he sat at the table, trusting with the stupid warm milk in his throat, still innocent despite it all. Despite the fact that there's only one left, despite knowing and not knowing to know, not wanting to know and living like this, he trusts the person who loves him the most will never, ever hurt him. And who makes sure of that? I wave goodbye to him in the same precise, invariable moment that he turns his head to look back toward the window, just like every morning. That's wonderful. Thank you, Mónica and DP. What a treat to hear these voices from around the world, and what a huge, huge treat. Let's see, have we got questions? Someone asked if the list of books in translation will be circulated by email following the Zoom meeting. Thank you. This is a wonderful series, attending for the first time. We're going to try. I'm chatting with Penn about that. So if it's at all possible, we'll do that. And in the meantime, I want to just throw a question out to everyone. All translators and writers want to talk about their work, and we put them on a strict time limit to read their work. So I want to throw it open to everyone. Can you describe your process of translation with your author, or the authors describe the process of collaborating with a translator to do their work? And I will just let someone jump in. And if they don't, I will call on them, because I'm a teacher and I can do that. How about Grace? I'm looking at Grace.
I'm a student, so you like lasered in on like the students' evasive looks. Iryna and I were just talking about it the other day, reminiscing on how when we first met, and I began translating her poetry. It was when I was living in Ukraine. So and I was learning Ukrainian, and translation was a more fun way to learn a language for me. It was something creative, something where you had a nice a thing at the end, an object that you could cherish, and instead of just sitting with a textbook and drilling vocabulary. So, and it was a really wonderful also way to learn about culture and about, even the dialects in Ukraine, which Iryna includes in her work. So we would meet up at cafes and kind of go through, the very roughly hewn what I had, and, I could ask her questions and she would help with finding the right words. And it was a long back and forth for several months. And it was a very special process making this book. And it turned out to be, I'll give a shout out to Piotr Florschik, who I know is in the audience. He had read this manuscript from another submission I had done and put us in contact with Kristín Holbert at Lost Horse Press. And this sparked this contemporary Ukrainian poetry series, which now has 10 volumes and has proved to be very important in the recent global cry for Ukrainian literature and translation to help understand this country that is in a very critical situation right now. So yeah, it's been very wonderful. I don't know if Iryna wants to add something to that.
I just can witness, yes, it was like you have just described. And for me also, it was a very interesting experience, because I myself am translating from Polish and English. And it was for the first time in my life that somebody started with me translating my poetry. It was translated in a couple of languages before, but it was with my participation, let's say. And this particular tandem was for me very, very interesting and important. And I must say that highlighting certain phrases or certain metaphors from the poetry and trying to convey the meaning, just one which could be catched, or probably double meaning, it was really interesting and challenging. So I remember these our sits in the cafe till today.
Wonderful. Would someone else like to share their experience translating? Each one is so different. How about you, KP? Because I think it's really interesting to translate from Icelandic.
I think there might have been, I don't know what the hand means either, but there was one. Yeah. Okay. I have a similar translation sort of entryway in that I was studying Icelandic when I started translating also, and became aware of Kristín Svava's work when I interviewed the Icelandic writer Sjón for Asymptote Journal when I was an assistant editor there, and just asked him if he knew any young up-and-coming women writers in the broadest sense. I had some texts from, my dad immigrated to Canada from Iceland, so I had access to some texts, but they were, yeah, I was looking for a fresher, more diverse reading. So got into translation with Hero Stories is a really different project than the last book I did of Kristín Svava's, because that one was contemporary language, whereas this one is using this found text that she has composed these new poems of, and this text was collected in the mid-20th century, but written, about 100 years before that. So there was a lot of vocab and a lot of questions about just older language and tone and formality and that kind of thing. that really came into play big this time.
Great. So I actually realized that the person who had their hand up was Deanna, which I did not see. So maybe we'll jump over to Deanna, because we actually got someone from the audience had noticed that too.
I have to say, I reiterate the two aspects. But this project was born out of a great gesture of solidarity that I have to say has kind of been passed through the generations, literally. I was pretty, about 10 years ago now, I was pretty down and out after leaving a master's program in Armenian literature and language in Venice, Italy. Because basically I had asked if we could be reading any women authors, maybe progressive thinking women authors in the Armenian language. And my advisor basically told me that there were no good Armenian women writers, and that anyway, the feminists were all to blame for the loss of the Armenian matriarch. And not able to have too much access to a canon that's so much obscured, I was just pretty down and out, and I had gone to Yerevan, back to Yerevan, and was just staying with some friends and just trying to think about, like, what am I going to be doing with my life? Because the PhD in these topics is what I had planned to be doing. And then Shushan and I met, and we had a really wonderful conversation one cool evening. And we talked about literature and politics. And I was telling her about my experience in Venice. And before she left, she handed me her book. And she said, "You're gonna finish, just go back and do it." And I opened the book some weeks later, and it's like, let me find out what this is about. All to read basically that Shushan's work had been a labor of love and unarchiving of where the hell these women have gone and how their stories have been censored through so many regimes of censorship. And so it was a moment of solidarity, and the process of translating together was in that. It continues.
If I may intervene just briefly, just intervene very briefly. It is a work of solidarity, because I honestly didn't believe that this book could be translated. It was untranslatable for me. So I think this gesture of reading the book in English, in Deanna's English, is amazing, and it found its home through Deanna's English. So I do want to thank you, Deanna, for Englishing this book that I think is untranslatable.
I actually have a question from the audience, but just quickly. From Zvinia Orlansky wants to know if Grace and Iryna have any future collaborations planned.
Hi, Zvinia. Great to hear from you, and looking forward to your reading next week. When Iryna has new poetry, she sends it to me. So one of the poems we wrote today was not in the book, and so we're kind of continuing with a trickle of work, but there are certainly other kinds of collaborations we could have in terms of scholarship or some kind of artistic projects. But we are definitely staying in touch. And actually, I've been translating with Iryna's daughter, Kristín. We translated, and she was I was teaching in Lviv a translation and publication class, and she was one of my students. And of course, she made beautiful translations. So we started translating together as well. So we might have a book of our translations coming out in the future, which has been great.
Wonderful. I love all these connections. Someone else who hasn't gotten a chance to talk?
I'll just say, yeah, Melanie and I met a long time ago in Panama when I was working there. My mom's from Panama, and we were both at a reading, and Melanie kind of extended her hand and was like, "Hey, you want to try translating some of my stories? And I was kind of horrified, like, I can't do that, right? And so it was like it's been a really long process where we started together on a few stories, and I was not confident in the process and what I was doing, right? And then going later to an MFA in Tucson, and again, like having a different writer be like, hey, can you translate this thing, this story? And then being like, yeah, I really want to go back to Melanie's work because I love it so much. I mean, what a gift, Melanie's work, because it's all the things I love and it's shaped my aesthetic and my thinking, right? So the ways that we work together, I've been really lucky. At the beginning, we worked really, really close together. Like we went to a cafe together, right? And we're looking at it and trying to figure it out and trying to untangle the languages. What do we want to put together? And then later it became more just kind of like, well, this is my question, right? Like, what's going on here? And Melanie has like so many mysteries in her writing, not just like this musical sentences, but you know, where like a character is withheld for a while. There's a voice speaking, but you don't know who it is for a while, that kind of thing. But yeah, just little things that we'd write, and mostly just those easy little interactions quickly. And yeah, I mean, I would love to one day get that book of short stories published, because we do have the whole thing, but it's a book of short stories. And I've been primarily been a poet, but we've worked on stories here and there, and then we're both mothers and working artists. So yeah, Melanie, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, not really. I just, by listening to you, I remember the entire process when you started, and now you have kids. Like in the process, we also grew up like we as women and in our lives. So it took a while to translate all this book, and yes, hopefully one day we can see it as a book, a complete book in English. I had a question for Kristín. It's from Iceland. Is that right? Do people say that your prose is poetic? I mean, I don't know your language, but when I was listening to your reading, and when I listened to the translation, in which many words were sometimes repeated, or it's like the flow of thinking of someone, how people in your language tell you how can I say, which adjective they give to your prose?
So it is so I'm working with prose, but I'm making it into poetry. So that's so it's published as a book of poetry. But I'm working with these old texts, so they are like short biographies of midwives that I'm working with. But I did like take them all apart and put them together again. So it's very, and I really like rhythmic stuff in poetry. I really like the musical element. So I was very much working with that. So I was taking the repetitions I found in the stories and putting them into repetitions in the poems. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to translate. I thought that Kara had totally gone insane when she told me that she had started translating this, but she had translated an earlier book of mine, Storm Warning, which was published in the US in 2018, and by Phoneme Media. And I thought, I think that was a really good basis. Like, I think we had like a good working, we always had a really good connection from the beginning. And I think it was good beginning with a more modern book with maybe a little less more conventional challenges before going into the really layered historical stuff. Yeah.
It's wonderful. That's really interesting. I was going to come back to you because I realized I did jump with having you have a chance to come in earlier. were there particular challenges? A lot of that's come up along the way, you know, that I keep hearing again and again that this book was, the author saying, I didn't think this book was translatable. Are there any specific challenges that you remember, any of the translators in your translation process where you just thought, you know, this is impossible, or why did I do this? Or I'm so glad I have my author here to ask about this. Oh, I know you had trouble. Everyone has trouble as a translator. Anyone want to share a particular one?
I can share one just because it drove me insane for weeks, and I just felt so embarrassed to ask Shushan what this word meant, which was andrakellutun. And so the on prefix in Armenian, it negates, is the negation. And I came up with so many different ideas, parsing out this word, thinking, oh, maybe it's a reference to apostolicism because Armenians are apostolic, but Christian apostolic as the national religion. And so I'm thinking maybe she's like making some sort of negation of Armenian apostolicism, and it's really fantastic. And so because she had some math equations later on in the book, I thought I would be really slick and put them in a superscript. So I put the negations in superscript, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great. All to finally ask out when I guess we were going through the edits, and I had to confront this. And I don't know, Shushan, what your reaction to all of those crazy ideas were, but basically, simply she had meant, she was referencing a person named Raquel, and there was the absence of Raquel. So I had come up with a whole other story about what andrakellutun meant, but in fact it was just Raquellessness. Yeah, but I remember being quite embarrassed to ask her in the beginning.
It's wonderful. Also your reluctance to ask the author, but it is wonderful to have the author to ask, is it not, when you're a translator?
Oh yes, most definitely. It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because translation is just one interpretation of many interpretations, and so in a certain sense, I was kind of getting censored by my own author that was, talking about her, like, one of the main themes of the book is about censorship. So it's an interesting process. I mean, like an ethical dilemma almost. I mean, what now that the text is in English and my author is a living author, so I'm so lucky to have these conversations with her. But what does it mean then? Is she overwriting my interpretation? And how do we deal with that? And so this is actually the interesting question, I think. So, and oftentimes I think it was a mix of the two that we would think together about it.
Anyone want to talk about the process of working together? A lot of you have said that there's a lot of sitting at cafes. There's a lot more face-to-face than is often in this group than is often the case with translators. But anyone who hasn't talked about how they work together want to say something? Or the other thing I toss out there, we've also mentioned, a lot of people have mentioned, been asked about a future project. So this would be a good time to talk about a future project if you have one.
I just want to mention that when we were starting our tandem translation work with Mahoney, it was pre-pandemic time. And for me also, it was pre-Zoom time. But since we all went heavily online within the last 3 years, I believe now our work can be even more easy because we can just see each other, to catch the mimic, to consult much more intensely and much more often than it was in previous times.
Another wonderful gift of Zoom.
I just say, I have many other works of Melanie's that I'd love to translate. I know there's some short stories for children, right? That been wanting to get into, and other larger works too. But yeah, just slow going. And then I wanted to say one thing about what's difficult to translate, which I think is, there's just so many. Like this story in particular is one that I would, rereading it is done like 10 years ago, a translation, and it felt so important to get the work out there. And now I'm like, oh, there's just so many things I would want to change. And so I guess what's difficult are two things. What major things? One is that kind of like overarching author think in a piece, right? The like meta component. Like how do you convey that, right? Like, so certain language, certain choices here that are like pushing up against power, right? They're like, I'm pushing up against the colonial power, like, this is problematic, and yet like, how do you translate it so that agency and liberation are obvious, right? Or do you, and then another is humor. I think humor, the layers of humor and double entendres and all of that, like don't always work in English, like English reader. So that's my failure as a translator, right? But like, how do you make that clear? Like this melodramatic ending in this particular story is supposed to be a little bit funny, it's tongue in cheek, right? Like, and that's not clear. I got to work on humor. You know what I mean?
Anyone else have another project? Hopeful project?
Sorry.
Yes. Oh, go ahead. No, please jump in.
Oh, sorry, I was supposed to raise my hand. I just want to add that as a writer, I feel so relieved of not being the translator or the illustrator of what I do, because I just write whatever I want. And I've been working with a translator at Christina. Now that I listen to her, all the questions she has in her head, I'm like, gosh, what a big work. And then the other day I have been working with an illustrator for a comic. And an illustrator is working so hard on drawing everything that was in my mind. And I just kept looking at all the conversations she had with me about, well, when you said that the such and such do that. So I really appreciate, I just want to say, I do appreciate the work of illustrators and translators, because really they take our thoughts and they think a lot about it and made it into something else, which is, for me, marvelous. So just a round of applause for you guys.
I think Mónica wants in, and that will probably be all we have time for. Mónica?
Yes, well, I would like to add that I have never met with Dorothy. She has troubles with her connection. In this moment, she is in Colombia. And I would like to tell about our relationship, because for me as a writer, it's very important to keep the voice in the text and the rhythm of the prose. So it's very, I feel that it's very important how Dorothy has keep this voice and this rhythm, and a special sensibility with the topic of the book about the motherhood, with a point of view about the violence and something that goes to broke some taboos about this topic. And all my admiration for all the translators and the great job that you do, and it's it's wonderful.
Thank you so much. And thanks again to all the wonderful readers. I want to thank our host, PEN America, and the PEN Translation Committee. And special thanks to Alia Gatto, who's been running the tech and organizing for us, and to Annalise Finnegan for getting us started, and to my co-organizers, Nancy Naomi Carlson, who's not here, who's I think just watching today and not one of the faces in boxes, and Catherine E. Young, and to all the members of the audience for joining us today. And I hope you can all join us for the last of the PEN readings of the Women in Translation Month, which will be next Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, August 30th at the same time, moderated by Catherine Young. Just thank you very much. I think all the translators in the world and all the authors in the world because they're amazing people.